After World War II, Japan went through an intense period of economic reconstruction. In a 1956 white paper on the economy, the Japanese government announced the era of post-war reconstruction has ended. Three symbolic consumer items became the popularly accepted definition of newfound prosperity: refrigerators, washing machines, and television sets. Mass production from factories hastily built to provide goods and services to increasingly affluent consumers. Mass production, mass consumption. Japanese Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda proclaimed his income doubling plan to double real GNP within 10 years. This policy statement was a blueprint to spur rapid economic growth and consumption. Japan put great emphasis on the development of technologies in the heavy and chemical industries. Many seashores throughout the country were reclaimed to build high-technology petrochemical complexes. Public transport systems such as highways and bullet train lines were constructed in rapid succession. For many Japanese, the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games were a declaration of the nation's entry into the world scene as a member of the leading developed countries. Unprecedented economic growth from the late 1950s until well into the 1960s doubled national income within 7 years. By 1968, Japanese GNP ranked second to the United States as the economy propelled the nation towards economic superpower status. But excessive priority on economic development and increased production created devastating pollution problems for Japan. As the national economy grew, the damage worsened.
The Bay of Minamata, an area where people traditionally lived off their fishing. In 1952, the numerous cats of the region started behaving oddly. Plagued by strange trembling fits, they began throwing themselves into the sea to end their suffering. No one paid much attention to the mass feline suicide until the same symptoms appeared in humans a few years later. Professor Harada began his career as a doctor in Minamata.
Their hands would shake uncontrollably. They were unable to talk. We couldn't understand what they said, and they drooled all the time. They were unable to walk in a straight line because their legs flailed as if they were drunk.
This strange disease came with terrifying symptoms: convulsions, blindness, deafness, loss of balance, irreversible damage to the nervous system, and in the most affected, terrible agony. Fears grew still greater when mothers began giving birth to severely handicapped babies. This unknown illness, for which there was no cure, primarily struck fishermen and their families. For fear it was contagious, fishermen were shunned. Suspicion soon turned to the Chisso Petrochemical Company based in the Bay of Minamata and the principal employer for the local population. Since the 1930s, the factory had used mercury as a catalyst in manufacturing plastic. After they were done with the mercury, it was released directly into the sea where it contaminated the seabed. Even though everyone suspected Chisso, no one had any proof. In an attempt to clear its conscience, the company secretly hired a team of scientists to research the problem. By conducting experiments on cats, the first organisms to develop symptoms, the team hoped to discover the cause of the mysterious illness. The scientists proved beyond a doubt that the symptoms were directly linked to mercury pollution in the seabed, but the company kept the test results secret.
If people discussed these issues with anyone outside the company, they were instantly dismissed. Speaking about it was strictly forbidden. Within the factory, there was a kind of tacit agreement not to talk about it.
In 1959, 3 years after the first appearance of human symptoms, independent researchers discover the origin of the sickness. They make the facts public. The fishermen begin to organize. To draw attention to their situation, they blockade the port, protest in front of the factory, and demand an immediate halt to the mercury dumping. Management's only response is to send in the riot police. Nonetheless, the controversy continues. To put an end to the rumors, the company installs a gigantic filter, which is supposed to purify the water being released into the sea. The machine is a fake and in no way reduces the mercury pollution. The fishermen continue to haul up nets filled with deadly poison. This environmental crime against humanity, knowingly perpetrated by the captains of industry, has the full support of the authorities. While fishermen die, Chiso is held up as a shining example of Japan's economic success. In 1966, Chiso finally stopped releasing mercury into the sea. They offered no apologies and showed no remorse. The company simply discovered a cheaper manufacturing process. Although Chiso considered the mercury affair over, the fishermen, aided by Japan's first environmental groups, did not give in. In 1973, almost 20 years after the sickness first appeared, they finally managed to convict the killer company. At the end of this extraordinary trial, the court required the head of Chiso to meet with the victims' families.
Can you give us back our mothers? No. Can you give us back our children? No. Your money won't bring back our loved ones.
All in all, a total of 400 tons of mercury were released into the sea. Thousands were handicapped for life, and at least 900 people were killed. But the world would not learn the lesson of Minamata.
The photos are hard to look at, but these are the hands, and these are the faces. The parents and their children whose lives were forever changed by one of the most horrific mercury poisonings in the world's history.
One of the most startling things about this story is that this was no one-off toxic dumping. The chemicals were discharged into the waterways around Minamata over more than 3 decades. And even when illnesses were linked to what was going on here, neither the company nor the authorities did anything about it.
In the town's museum, exhibits chart how the practice went on until 1968, 12 years after the disease was first diagnosed, 9 years after experiments on cats confirmed mercury poisoning as its cause. Masami Ogata's grandfather, a fisherman, died of the disease. He says in as much pain as it's possible for a human to suffer. Ogata says he's learned much by eventually confronting rather than hiding his own symptoms and fighting for compensation as a victim of the disaster.
If you received aid, in a way, it is understood that your case has been settled. But our physical conditions and symptoms change daily. The company and the authorities may be able to help us financially, but they can't save our hearts.
Ogata and Nagamoto are among more than 2,000 people who've met the strict criteria to be designated Minamata patients, qualifying for continuing support. But more than 2,000 others are still fighting for that status. Near the museum, a memorial evokes the scattering of liquid mercury towards the sea. A clean-up operation costing hundreds of millions of dollars has, authorities say, restored the waters here and their sea life to the purest standards. But if the town's story, 60 years on, is one of steady recovery, for those worst affected by its darkest legacy, It's a story of continuing hardship and steadily worsening illness.
And it's happening again.
This time, it's affecting every corner of the planet. Power plants are burning record amounts of coal that contains mercury. Industrial manufacturing of plastics is another source.
Mercury is in the air we breathe, it's in our oceans, it's in our rivers, it's in our food.
Mercury is a problem that exists for a long time, and Minamata could occur in many other places in the world.
Artisanal gold mining operations have quadrupled in the past decade.
But the quest for small amounts of gold comes at a high price.
Most small-scale gold mining communities pour mercury straight into the river. We don't want Minamata sprouting up in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Africa, and Latin America.
By naming the convention the Minamata Convention on Mercury, what we are saying is never again.
The Minamata Convention on Mercury is the newest of a proud tradition of treaties that are addressing our planet's greatest challenges: chemicals, climate, biodiversity loss, corruption, social injustice. When humans are presented with great challenges, we are born to restore balance and predictability. Together, these conventions have made the world better. But on this day, we stand on the shores of Minamata Bay to begin the journey to make Mercury history.
Let us therefore fulfill the justified expectations of the peoples of the world to ensure a better quality of life for all.
The time for action is here now.
Then, a history-making moment.
History offers us perspective, a chance to see how far we've come. It helps us chart the future.
I declare open the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment.
What happened in Minamata, Japan, nearly 60 years ago isn't the only reason why we're here today. But it was our wake-up call.
What happened in Minamata many years ago was a catastrophe for humankind. And what we have now is not a new problem, it's a new solution.
The global community has agreed that this needs to be tackled at the global level through a legally binding instrument in order to have the impact that we are looking for the future of this planet, for the public health and for the environment.
Before we can rid the planet of mercury, we need to understand where and how it finds its way into our water, our food supply, and ultimately, us. More than 50 years after Minamata disease was discovered, unhealthy levels of mercury can be found in every corner of the planet, and they're growing at an alarming rate. Today, we are emitting more and more mercury than ever before. Mercury is in the air we breathe, our oceans and rivers. It's in our food. Power plants are burning record amounts of coal that emit mercury.
Mercury is a global pollutant. Once emitted into the atmosphere, it can travel around the globe.
Industrial manufacturing of plastics and cement release tons of mercury each year. And thousands of artisanal gold mines still use mercury to extract their gold. While removing mercury from the gold supply chain involves millions of artisanal miners, you can achieve the same impact by removing mercury from a few large-scale industries. As the economies in developing countries rise, so does their demand for energy, cement, and plastics, all of which emit large amounts of mercury. Removing mercury from coal is not an easy process, and developing countries rely on coal as a major energy source to drive their economic growth. One of the goals of the Minamata Convention is to provide a pathway for these industries to reduce their mercury emissions.
Coal is like a little periodic table. It has, of course, majority of it is carbon. That's why we burn it, to extract heat energy from it. But it contains traces of elements, among them traces of heavy metals like mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, all of them toxic.
Removing mercury from the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink is a mission that began in Minamata and ends in every corner of our planet.